This webinar is on bacterial and viral diseases of sheep and goat. So coming to the sheep and goat sector in India, India ranks second in the population of goats, third in the population of sheep, and the entire livestock is sharing about 4.9% to the GDP. These animals are providing a lot of economy to the farmers, but there are several setbacks, and one of these setbacks is infectious diseases. So these infectious diseases, they are defined, these are the diseases or disorders that are caused by the pathogenic microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, parasites, or fungi that can spread directly or indirectly from one animal to another animal. These bacterial and viral diseases, they are causing a lot of problem in the sheep and goat sector. When you observe the basic animal husbandry statistics, so there are about 9 diseases that are being reported every year, that is foot and mouth disease, hemorrhagic septicemia, anthrax, enterotoxemia, sheeppox and goatpox, blue tongue, contagious caprine pleuropneumonia, mastitis, PPR. So when you observe the mortality, anthrax is giving mortality of about 100%, whereas caprine pleuropneumonia, it is about 32.9, PPR is about 32.3. So these are the diseases that are posing high morbidity as well as mortality to the sheep and goat sector. Then what is the impact of infectious diseases? In one paper, I observed that the impact of infectious diseases, especially in goat keeping, the mortality rates are about 32.8, 32.1, and 15.8% in kids, and 31.2, 19.9, and 14.9% in adult goats for small, medium, and large goat keeping, which in turn causes about a loss of 11,720 million per annum. The total losses due to the in goat sector scaled up to 11,720 million per annum. And if we adopt proper prophylactic measures and proper preventive measures, we can save up to 5,144 millions. That means 50% of these losses are mainly because of infectious origin. So suppose if you have been to a farm or if you are going to attend any outbreak, so in that scenario, one has to keep in your mind the following important factors or the following important points. What is the descriptive epidemiology of the disease? So how many animals are affected? What is the age of the animal? What is the species? What is the sex? All these things should be minded while you are attending an outbreak. Then what is the morbidity, case fatality, and mortality rates? So how many animals affected? What is the mortality percentage, and what is the case fatality? What is the season? Relationship to other species. That means is there any other species that is responsible for the transmission of the disease? What are the recent changes in the management? What is the vaccination history? What is the nutritional history? What is the previous disease status in the previous year? Then what are the source for these animals? Suppose a farmer is buying any animal, so what is its source? Whether he has imported any animal? What are the known risk factors? If any treatment is used, whether it has given success rate or not. These are all the points needs to be considered while we are observing any outbreak of the disease. So with this little introduction, I am taking few viral and bacterial diseases which are posing a lot of economic losses for this sector. The first one is the blue tongue. We all know that blue tongue is the one which is caused by genus Arbovirus and the family Rheoviridae. And in India, it was first reported in 1964, whereas in Andhra Pradesh, it was reported in 1974. The most susceptible species is sheep. Sheep is the one which exhibits severe clinical signs of blue tongue. And the reservoirs for this are cattle, buffalo, and goats. These 3 animals are acting as reservoirs, and they are maintaining the virus and is responsible for the outbreaks of the disease in sheep. By definition, this disease is a non-contagious and insect-borne infection characterized by high fever, stomatitis, catarrhal rhinitis, inflammation of tongue, sensitive laminae of foot in sheep, and subclinical form of disease in cattle. So here, this disease is a non-contagious disease. That means it is not transmitted by contact. It is the one which is transmitted by vectors. Till today, there are about 28 serotypes of which 24 are the typical serotypes and the rest of the ones are atypical serotypes. In India, 23 serotypes were observed, and except 22 and 25 to 28. As of now, 15 serotypes were isolated, and this is the one which is responsible severe economic losses, and it is a notifiable disease by World Organization for Animal Health, that is nothing but OIE. When we observe the distribution of blue tongue, we are much concerned about the Indian subcontinent. Here, the distribution is 1, 2, 3, 9, 12, 14 to 21, and 23. These are the serotypes that were observed in this subcontinent. And the main vector is Culicidus brevitaris, Culicidus vade, and Culicidus fulvus. These are the species that is responsible for the transmission of the infection. Now, when we observe the different serotypes in different states of India, some states are showing more number of serotypes, whereas some states are showing less number of serotypes. So Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. So several states are having more number of serotypes, whereas some states are having less number. So this is because for the vector, suitable environment is required. Though in Kerala and Odisha, there is suitable environment, the transmission of disease or the occurrence of disease is less because of less densely populated sheep. In case of Rajasthan, and to some extent in Srinagar as well as in Uttarakhand, so in those areas, because of the extreme climatic conditions, in case of Rajasthan, it is extreme dry climatic condition. In case of Srinagar or Uttarakhand, extreme cold. These are the things that are responsible for the low prevalence of different serotypes. And in some articles, they mentioned about the breed susceptibility. So what is that they are saying is wool breeds are more prone to the disease. Here, wool type, it may be of any type. It may be a hairy wool or fine wool. Nellore is more susceptible than Deccani. Raman white and Tirchi black is more susceptible than Vambur and Mecheri in Tamil Nadu. Coming to the seroprevalence of blue tongue in India, 43% is observed in goats, 39% in sheep, 38% in cattle, 34% in buffaloes, 16% in camels, and 66% in mutton. So by observing this statistics itself, you can assume that rest of the species, that means instead of sheep, the rest of the species, they are acting as good reservoirs for the incidence of blue tongue in sheep. So this is when we are going for any kind of preventive measures or any kind of control measures to control the disease, one has to keep in mind about the other species also, because they are acting as reservoirs. If you are not able to control the infection in them, it is not possible for us to control the disease in sheep. This is the structure of blue tongue virus, and here VP2 protein is the one which is responsible for different types, the serotypes. So till now, I am discussing with you about the serotypes. Then there is one term that is topotypes in case of blue tongue virus. So these topotypes means it correlates with the geographical regions or origins. So whatever the BTV strains that are correlated with the geographical regions or origins, they are known as BTV topotypes. So these topotypes are the screening of these topotypes is very, very important for the control measures. Suppose you may be using vaccine with few serotypes, but after over a period of time, probably that area do not contain those serotypes. That means the topotypes might have changed. So in that scenario, one has to screen these topotypes continuously to achieve a good control program. And this complex epidemiology of the blue tongue disease is mainly because of the density and distribution of the Culicidus vector, population and host species composition, climatic conditions, and the virus strain. Coming to the Culicidus distribution, if you observe this picture, this is the distribution of Culicidus or the predilection of Culicidus in India from January to December. When we observe this picture, barely we are seeing less number of Culicidus population in the month of May. Whereas in the rest of the months, you are observing the predilection of Culicidus. This red color indicates the presence of Culicidus. So that means there is every possibility for the transmission of the disease in almost all the months. This is the one of the article that is showing the global dispersal routes of blue tongue virus over 1,000 years ago. According to this author, what is he saying is China and India, these are the countries having higher number of goat populations. They form the ancestral countries for the blue tongue. Later on, it has distributed to sheep, and then sheep acts as a good transmitting agent for this blue tongue. So the intense dispersal routes between the countries surrounding the Mediterranean basin, which is attributed to the hot and dry climatic conditions, as well as the abundance of multiple Culicoides species. And the Balkans region remains the essential ecological niche for the blue tongue virus incursion from Asia into Europe. So they have taken 1,000 years data, and they compiled that data, and they derived these points as abstract. Coming to the transmission of the disease. So now we are stressing about the transmission of the disease, or the important factor for the transmission of the disease is the Culicoides vector. So from susceptible host to from the infected host to the susceptible host, Culicoides is the one which is responsible for the transmission of the disease. In this case, you can appreciate two incubation periods in blue tongue. One is extrinsic incubation period, the other one is intrinsic incubation period. This extrinsic incubation period varies about 4 to 20 days, and this is in the Culicoides vector. And the intrinsic incubation period is in sheep, and it is about 2 to 7 days. So probably in less than 1 week, the susceptible host exhibits the clinical signs. So incubation period is nothing but the point of entry of the virus and the exhibition of clinicals. So the Culicoides is responsible for transmission, but with the advent of different serotypes, that is 25, 26, 27, and 28, they are saying that contact and oral route of transmission in case of blue tongue, as well as the venereal route of transmission. But as far as India is concerned, we are not having these serotypes, and till date, they haven't identified these serotypes in India. So in India, Culicoides is the main route for the transmission of this disease. And another possible route of transmission is the mechanical vector and the iatrogenic transmission, as well as the transplacental transmission. So from the pregnant Eve, the virus gets transmitted to the lambs. This is how the transmission of blue tongue takes place. Then pathogenesis of the blue tongue disease. Entry of virus into the host by the Culicoides bite. Then it is being taken up by the local lymph nodes. From then, it circulates into different organs. During this process, the virus, as this one is an endotheliotropic virus, which is having predilection for the endothelial cells, in which the virus multiplies and cause damage to the endothelia, which in turn leads to the increased permeability of this endothelium. Later on, this virus reaches different organs like heart, liver, lungs, uterus, and spleen. In turn, leads to the different clinical signs like cyanosis of the tongue, hemorrhages base of the pulmonary artery, and because of the lymphoid depletion, in turn leads to the secondary bacterial complications. And this virus multiplies at the sensitive lamina, which in turn leads to the coronitis. So when you observe the clinical signs of blue tongue or during its pathogenesis, mainly these clinical signs are attributed to the mechanical pressure. So wherever those areas that are having mechanical pressure, in those areas, as the virus is causing some damage to the vascular endothelium, which in turn causes the clinical signs. When we observe the clinical signs of the disease, the incubation period of blue tongue is less than 1 week, and the animal shows general clinical signs in relation to the disease, such as rise in body temperature to 40.5 to 41 degrees centigrade for about 5 to 6, nasal discharges, salivation, reddening of buccal mucosa and nasal mucosa. So and moreover, swelling or edema of face, hyperemia, and edema of lips, nostrils, all these things are observed in case of blue tongue. There is watery discharges, and these watery discharges turn into mucopurulent discharges because of the secondary bacterial complications. Reddening of the buccal mucosa is one of the features with this particular disease. And the affected sheep shows wry neck because of the weakening of muscle and muscle degeneration, twitching of the head and neck. Is the animal places its neck to one side. And Hyperemia of coronary, which in turn leads to the coronitis. Death of the animal takes place after 6 days after appearance of the severe clinical signs. Suppose if the animal is recovered, it is there for long convalescence, loss of fleas, and fetal abnormalities are observed, because this is the one which is having predilection to the uterus. There also the virus is responsible for damage to the vasculature, which in turn leads to the fetal abnormalities. And in dead animals, that means if you conduct a postmortem, lungs appear heavy, edematous, congested, hemorrhagic, and they are not collapsed. One of the pathognomonic sign in case of blue tongue is hemorrhagic band at the base of the pulmonary artery. This is one of the pathognomonic sign in case of PM, that is during postmortem. Then other clinical signs in other species, that is cattle. In case of cattle, the virus shows inapparent clinical signs. It shows fever, stiffness, laminitis, salivation, edema of lips, and nasal discharges, fetid breath. In some cases, coronitis, and in some animals, it shows fetal abnormalities or congenital abnormalities. In case of goats, the goats exhibit very little clinical signs. And in case of deer, the clinical signs are almost similar to the epizootic hemorrhagic disease of deer. And this is characterized by multiple hemorrhages throughout the body. So these are the different clinical signs in different animals. Then coming to the diagnosis, the majority of the blue tongue disease diagnosis based on the serological methods. Though there are several diagnostic methods for the diagnosis of blue tongue, theoretically there are several diagnostic methods, but the practicality, OIA recommended serodiagnostic tests are complement fixation test, agar-gel immunodiffusion test, competitive ELISA, and direct ELISA. Suppose if any farmer approaches you, well, so we need to import the animal or we want to export the animal. So for this purpose, what are the different diagnostic tests I need to conduct, or what are the tests to be conducted for the animal? So for blue tongue, if you want to prove that animal is free from blue tongue, you have to go for any of these following tests, or you have to approach the laboratory for these diagnostic tests. Another diagnostic test is indirect ELISA-based detection of BTV and S3 antibodies. This can be used as a differential diagnostic method for the infected to vaccinated animals. So here NS3 protein, this NS3 thing but the non-structural protein, and this non-structural protein is only present when the virus multiplies in the host. As we are using inactivated vaccine, there is no multiplication of the agent within the host. So there is no question of NS3 antibodies. Only in case of infected, there is production of NS3 antibodies. So if you use this as a diagnostic test, you can differentiate whether the animal is vaccinated or infected animal. Then after the inception of AINP-BT program, they are using the distribution of anti-BTV antibodies were carried out by using monoclonal antibody-based competitive ELISA. Then coming to the differential diagnosis, this disease has to be differentiated from foot and those diseases that are showing similar clinical signs to that of blue tongue. So that means foot and mouth disease, blue tongue to foot and mouth disease. In case of foot and mouth disease, formation of vesicles is one of the important clinical signs. There also formation of vesicles is present in areas where there is maximum mechanical pressure. That's why you can appreciate the vesicle formation at mouth, around the mouth, then on feet. But to differentiate between these two diseases, such type of vesicle formation is absent in case of blue tongue. And moreover, these vesicles, in case of foot and mouth disease, these vesicles rupture and they in turn leads to the ulcer formation, and which in turn leads to the secondary bacterial complications. Such kind of things are absent, but if you want to differentiate between tongue and foot and mouth disease, another important thing is in case of foot and mouth disease, you can appreciate severe laminitis. Then another one is contagious ecthyma. In case of contagious ecthyma, clinical signs are mainly confined to the mouth. In case of sheeppox, pock lesions are observed on all over the body, and they are highly evident on hairless portions. And epizootic hemorrhagic disease, this is the one which is also caused in case of deer by the orbivirus belongs to this family. There you can appreciate the severe kind of hemorrhages all over the body. So this is how one can go for the differential diagnosis of this particular disease. Coming to the treatment, local irrigation with the mild disinfectants. So to avoid secondary bacterial complications, irrigate the local wounds with the mild disinfectants, fluid and electrolyte therapy, and treat it for secondary bacterial complications. So this antibiotic therapy, all these things I will tell you at the end of this session. Then coming to the control and prevention of blue tongue, Culicoides vector control is very, very important in India to control this blue tongue. Check the breeding areas of the culicoids, observe the form and check the breeding areas such as manure piles and biogas slurry. Incessant rains and wind movement, they also favor the Culicoides population. Administer ivermectin to the ruminants. Suppose even that farm is having other animals, other ruminants in combination with the sheep. So give ivermectin to them, long-acting ivermectin, so that those animals get protection from these culicoids for about 28 days. So you can break the transmission cycle. And other strategies to reduce the biting rate for the ruminants, such as using traps, either light traps or by using decoy animals. That means these decoy animals are nothing but the hosts that are not being responded for the Culicoides vector. And other husbandry measures like remove the affected animal immediately, protect the other ruminants by using mosquito nets, or cover the portals of entry for these culicoids such as windows and doors, either by using whole fine mesh or synthetic pyrethroid insecticide impregnated netting, or by spraying insecticides. So one can use fly-free zone collars for small ruminants, or you can use mosquito nets for animal housing. So this is a small one, and this one, the entire shed has been covered with the mosquito net. So if we can insist the farmer to use these practices, definitely there is a lot of relief to the animal, not only for the Culicoides, but also for other diseases which are transmitted by these insects. Definitely the animal feels peace, and there is no loss, or there is a reduced loss by these vector population. So ultimately, there is a good reap from this particular practice. Then coming to the vaccines available, theoretically there are several vaccines: live attenuated vaccines, inactivated vaccines, subunit recombinant vectored vaccines, genetically engineered vaccines. But we are using inactivated pentavalent vaccine by having 1, 2, 10, 16, and 23 serotype, which is being used in India. But now the question arises, okay, we are using vaccine for blue tongue. Why there are several outbreaks even after vaccination? So here there are several reasons for the vaccination outbreaks even after vaccination. So in India, the main problem is, or the main problem of concern for vaccination programs itself is limited access to the nomadic people keeping sheep and goat. That is one of the important factor. Then another one is presence of asymptomatic infections, prolonged viremic stage in cattle, not only in cattle and other species, and the virus persistence in vector population, that is maintaining the virus in the environment. And the recent reports is suggesting that composition of livestock is the influencing factor for the spatial pattern of blue tongue in southern India. Here, this composition of livestock, it has overwhelmed the influence of environment or influence of other factors in the spread of blue tongue disease. So this is the first picture. You are observing annual outbreaks of blue tongue. And in the second picture, they have taken the indicators. So these indicators are buffaloes. Then next one is the non-dip sheep, exotic sheep, irrigated crop area, and rain-fed areas. These are the indicators that they have taken, and they observed that buffalo density is one of the factors that is favoring the blue tongue spread. They are telling that is the reason why they are telling composition of livestock. So not only sheep, what are the other animals that are there in that particular farm is also very, very important for the blue tongue control programs. Then how to overcome these things? One is better diagnostic methods, surveillance system, vaccination with the circulating serotypes, and control of vector. So control of vector can be done by insisting the farmer about the managemental practices, regular vaccination. So here in regular vaccination also, one has to monitor about the circulating serotypes in that particular area. Lack of good surveillance system to monitor this circulation of blue tongue serotypes is very, very important for the failure of these control programs. And most of the times there is a variation in the vaccine and field circulating serotype. So this is with regards to the blue tongue disease. Then coming to the PPR, this is Pestidis petits ruminantis. This is the one which is caused by RNA virus. So even the previous one, blue tongue, is also caused by RNA virus, which is having 10 segments. Because of that, there is a lot of serotypes, and which in turn leads to the major problem in the field condition. Similarly, in case of PPR also, this is also a negative sense RNA virus, but it is not that much unstable that of blue tongue, but it is little bit stable compared to that of the blue tongue. This the synonyms for this is goat plague, ovine rinderpest, and this is first reported in India in Tamil Nadu. By definition, this is acute and subacute disease of sheep and goat, characterized by fever, erosive stomatitis, conjunctivitis, gastroenteritis, and pneumonia. Finally, you can abbreviate this disease as pneumoenteritis complex. This is the one which shows main clinical signs in goat compared to that of the sheep. And this is the structure of the virus. And there are 4 lineages in the PPR. Among the fourth lineage is the one which is widely spread in India. The spatial distribution of PPR, red color indicates infected areas, yellow indicates at-risk areas, whereas rest of the things assumed to be officially free and at risk. Then coming to the incidence of the disease. This disease is primarily observed in goats, then sheep, and also in Ethiopian camels, cattle, Indian buffaloes, Saudi gazelles, and deers. The prevalence of disease in goat and sheep, it is about 43.56%. In case of cattle and buffaloes, it is 4.58%. The severity of disease in goats can be observed by observing the case fatality rate. The CFR in goats is 55 to 85%. CFR in sheep is less than 10%. And the mortality rate may go up to 100% in native population and 20% in endemic areas. This statistics itself is telling that goat is the primary host for this particular disease. Of course, there are several theories for the origin of disease. All these things are not at all a matter here. The thing is how best we can control the infection. Then coming to the transmission of the disease, it requires close contact between the animals, ocular, nasal, and oral secretions, as well as the feces. They form the source of the virus or source of the infection. And the infection occurs mainly by the inhalation route, and inhalation of the aerosols produced by sneezing and coughing. Then fomites, such as bedding material or the infected bedding materials. These are the things that are responsible for the transmission of the disease. And there is no carrier state in case of PPR, and the spread is not dependent on the vector. So coming to the determinants of the disease. So the determinants are nothing but the factors that are responsible for the occurrence of outbreak. Outbreaks, they don't happen at just. There is a series of events for the outbreak. So these series of events are being accumulated by different factors like agent factors, environmental factors, and host factors. In case of PPR, the agent factor is the virulence of the PPRV, that is viral virulence. And environmental factors are stress, stocking density, nomadism, and new animals. New animals play an important role for the occurrence of PPR in the herd. Then host factors, age, young animals are more susceptible, breed, immune status of these animals, species, current infections. All these things favor the occurrence of disease. Coming to the pathogenesis, entry of virus by inhalation. From there, it is being taken up by the antigen presenting cells to the draining lymph nodes. There, the virus multiplies and spreads to different predilection sites like distant lymph nodes, spleen, Peyer's patches, and gastrointestinal tract. So the organism in lungs, it leads to the respiratory clinical signs. In the gastrointestinal tract, in turn leads to the gastroenteritis, whereas in lymph nodes and other lymphatic organs, it causes enlargement of these organs. This is in brief about the pathogenesis of this virus. Coming to the symptoms, acute form of the disease is characterized by sudden onset of high fever. In majority of the viral infections, if that virus is having the property to cause acute infection, definitely sudden onset of high fever is the one of the important clinical sign. Depression, animals appear sleepy. There is a watery discharges from the eyes, nose, mouth, and these watery discharges they become more and cause wetting of the face. Later, these watery discharges turn into mucopurulent discharges because of the secondary bacterial complications. And in case of PPR, the hair stands erect, giving the animal a bloated appearance. There are pinpoint grayish areas of necrosis on the buccal mucosa. So this buccal mucosa, it may be on gums, dental pad, palate, lips, inner aspect of the cheek, upper surface of the tongue. These areas gets affected by PPR. There is profound halitosis, sore mouth and swollen lips. Diarrhea is the predominant sign. It may be mucoid or blood-tinged diarrhea. Erosion of vulva and prepuce. Death takes place within 1 week. So these are the important clinical signs in acute form of infection. Coming to the subacute form, this subacute form is common in sheep, but also occur in goats. Acting of eyelids is one of the feature. Then diarrhea, soiling of the back takes place because of the diarrhea. This is the peculiar feature or the important feature that you observe in case of PPR. So these are the grayish necrotic lesions that appear on the buccal mucosa. The grayish necrotic lesions, they enlarge in size, they coalesce, and they form a pseudomembrane, and which in turn paves way for the bacterial complications. In turn leads to the severe halitosis from the mouth of these animals. Very foul smelling breath is observed in case of PPR. These are the mucopurulent nasal discharges. In some others, they mentioned that the jowl edema in PPR. When it comes to the lesions, the carcass appear dehydrated, soiled hindquarters, crusts around the eye, nose, and lips, mouth, dirty white, false membrane, and erosions are seen on hard palate, tongue, cheeks, and esophagus. Lips appear swollen with erosions. Nasal cavity is congested, lining with clear or creamy yellow colored exudates and erosions. Lungs are dark red or purple in color. They're firm to touch. And these lesions are mainly seen in the anterior and cardiac lobe of lungs. Pleuritis and hydrothorax are observed. So this in lungs, red color or purple colored areas in apical and cardiac lobes. Then fibrinous exudate. So definitely if fibrinous exudate is there and there is a damage to the lung, in turn leads to the respiratory distress in the animal, and the animal suffers a lot for respiration. Then frothy discharges in the trachea is one of the important lesions that you observe in PPR. And in abomasum, congested lining with hemorrhages, small intestine congested with hemorrhages, lymph nodes appear swollen and soft, and in the large intestine, small red hemorrhages along the folds of the lining that join together and appear darker or green, black, either green color or black in stale carcasses. These are nothing but the zebra stripings. So this is the zebra striping pattern in case of PPR. So this is the sheep intestine affected with the PPR, showing hemorrhages as well as the blood clots. This is the goat intestine affected with the PPR, showing hemorrhages and blood clots. Then how to diagnose this disease? So clinical samples to be collected are tears, gum debris, tissues, unclotted blood, and clotted blood or serum. What is the laboratory diagnostic procedures? So isolation and identification of the virus. Isolation, it is not possible at field level. This is for the laboratory people to go for isolation and identification of the organism, but at field level also, if your laboratory is having, or if your VD is having agarose or small equipment like agarose, slide. With those things, you can conduct AGPT by taking a vaccine as an antigen. Use vaccine as antigen, take the serum from the animal, go for AGPT. If the AGPT gives you result, then you can suspect that, or you can think that this animal is suffering with PPR. And the other one is countercurrent immunoelectrophoresis. Even for countercurrent immunoelectrophoresis also, you require a small equipment which may not be possible at the field level. Then immunocaptured ELISA, that is an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, which is a sandwich ELISA using monoclonal antibodies to differentiate between PPR as well as the rinderpest. Competitive ELISA, using monoclonal antibodies of N and H proteins to differentiate between PPR and rinderpest. Then immunofluorescence and immunoperoxidase test, polymerase chain reaction, and nucleic acid probes. These are the little bit advanced diagnostic techniques which can be conducted at the district level laboratories. And in case of serology, competitive ELISA and virus neutralization test. And this virus neutralization test is the one which is a prescribed international trade test for the diagnosis of PPR. Coming to the vaccination, there are several strains for the vaccination. Sungri 96, Arsur 87, Coimbatore 97, Nigerian 75. But these are the conventionally attenuated strains. And the thermo-adopted strain is Sungri 96, Jhansi 2003, Revati 2000. Arsur is the one which was used in Tamil Nadu. And majority of the Indian states, they are using Sungri strain as a vaccine against PPR. So the dose of this vaccine is a 10 to the power of 2.5 TCID 50 virus particle in each dose. And this vaccination can be repeated at every 3 years. Then control programs, methods are required in majority of the diseases. Managemental methods are very, very important to control the diseases. In case of PPR also, quarantine is very, very important. If any new entry is there, any infected animal, better is slaughter of the infected animal and proper disposal of the carcasses and contaminated fomites, decontamination, restriction on importation of sheep and goat from the affected areas. So these are the few important control measures that helps the farmers to reduce this infection. And the control of PPR mainly relies on movement control, that is quarantine, and the focused vaccination, ring vaccination, which is a prophylactic immunization in high-risk populations. All these things will favor the control programs to reduce this infection. Then coming to the another important disease, that is sheeppox and goatpox. So this is one of the viral infection after smallpox. Among the pox diseases, this is the one which is showing high mortality. This belongs to the family Poxvirida, and this is the largest DNA virus, enveloped virus. And this is, by definition, this disease is a highly contagious disease of sheep and goats characterized by ocular and nasal discharges and the formation of pock lesions on the skin, respiratory, as well as the gastrointestinal mucosa. The morbidity rates reach up to 70 to 90%, whereas the mortality rates up to 5 to 10%, and they may even go up to 100%. This is the global distribution of sheeppox and goatpox, 2010, 2013, and 2015. There you can appreciate the increased spread of this infection over the period. Coming to the clinical signs, sudden onset of fever, discharges from the nose, eyes, and salivation, loss of appetite, reluctance to move, depression, emaciation, and the skin lesions appear 1 to 2 days, extending all over the body. And they're most evident or most obvious on skinless portions like face, eyelids, ears, perineum, and tail. Lesions may also be seen on the mucous membranes of nostrils, mouth, and vulva. Acute respiratory distress. Mortality peaks about 2 weeks after the onset of clinical signs, especially the skin lesions. Abortions occur because of the secondary complications of this disease. These are the skin lesions that appear on the surface of skin because of the pox. So definitely you can easily differentiate between pox and blue tongue by observing these things, even PPR. And this is the goat pox affected herd. In this herd, the prevalence of or the incidence of the disease has gone up to 80% and the mortality is about 50%. This is the one which I personally visited. From this, I have collected the samples for the goat pox isolation, etc. So some animals are showing mucopurulent nasal discharges, and this is the scab lesions that are appearing on the hairless portions of the skin, which are highly evident. Here you can appreciate the formation of scab lesions. So imagine a small boil or small pimple on your face or boil on your skin portion definitely cause a lot of irritation to us. If the animal is suffering with such a kind of lesions, definitely the animal suffers a lot and it enables to take feed properly, water properly, and it suffers a lot because of the pain caused by these lesions. So, and ultimately, this in turn leads to the secondary bacterial complications, which in turn leads to the pneumonia, respiratory distress. All these things leads to the high mortality of this particular disease condition. So the lesions of this disease are, they develop on lung, kidney, spleen, lymph nodes, and other internal organs, along with the lesions on mouth, nares, eye, and eyelids. Mucous membranes ulcerate, slough off, becomes necrotic because of the secondary bacterial complications, and the nodules in the digestive, respiratory, and urogenital system leads to the complications like digestive disturbance. Respiratory, in the respiratory tract, it leads to the pneumonia, and in the urogenital system, it causes abortions. So animals in the animals with the lung lesions, they show respiratory signs including cough, pneumonia. Nodules in the digestive system, it leads to the diarrhea. These are the malignant lesions that observed in sheeppox and goat pox. Lungs get affected, even the kidney gets affected with the disease. And then what are the samples to be collected for the diagnosis? So here, full skin thickness biopsies, if possible, vesicular fluid, skin scrapings, lymph node aspirates. Whole blood can be collected in heparin or EDTA, and paired serum samples for serology. So here, while transport of these skin thickness biopsies, if that specimen is for virus isolation, transport in, if required, transport in 10% glycerol saline. If it is not required, if the laboratory is very near to your place, simply transport the sample in a sterile container on ice so that it reaches the laboratory as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you use 10% glycerol saline so that this 10% glycerol shouldn't cause damage to the virus. That's why you take a big piece of skin tissue so that the glycerol shouldn't enter at the middle of the skin tissue and should not cause any damage to the virus or destroy the virus. Diagnostic methods are AGID, that is Agar-Gel immunodiffusion test, ELISA using P32 antigen. This test is widely used for the diagnosis, indirect ELISA for serology, and in order to differentiate between sheeppox and goat pox, PCR of P32 gene, and then going for restriction enzyme analysis. Then PCR of RPO30 gene and sequencing helps to differentiate between sheeppox and goat pox. And to the best of my knowledge, and the literature says that under Indian subcontinent, under the scenario of Indian subcontinent, the sheeppox and goat pox, they are showing high host specificity. Majority of times, there is no that means the sheeppox is not causing disease in goats, goat pox is not causing disease in sheep. They are highly host specific. And coming to the differential diagnosis, the clinical signs of sheeppox and goat pox itself, they are highly characteristic and they need not be differentiated with other diseases. But in mild forms, it should be differentiated from multiple insect bites. By the history, you can know about the multiple insect bites by observing the environment or by observing the farm scenario. You can able to know about the multiple insect bites, and not only that, in case of multiple insects bite, only few animals get affected, not the entire farm. Then contagious ecthyma, where lesions are confined to the mouth, And blue tongue, it's very easy to differentiate it from blue tongue. PPR, already we discussed about the clinical signs of PPR, which is a pneumoenteritis complex. And there is no nodules on the skin surface in case of PPR. Photosensitization, history of eating poisonous plants, dermatophylosis. Here, dermatophylosis, it is one of the clinical disease that is caused by Dermatophilus congolense in case of sheep. And this disease, or the seasonal occurrence of this disease, is rainy season. Because in rainy season, if the animal wets for a long duration of time, there is a possibility for the multiplication of this bacteria, which in turn leads to the skin lesions, and the patchy areas of the skin gets affected and they will be peeled off. That is the main clinical sign that you observe in case of dermatophylosis. Whereas in case of sheeppox or goatpox, the main incidence or the major time for the occurrence of this disease is March and April. So by this itself, you could able to differentiate between dermatophylosis and sheeppox and goatpox, then parasitic pneumonia, then caseous lymphadenitis. In case of caseous lymphadenitis, lymph nodes get enlarged, which are very hard to touch, whereas the other clinical signs you do not appreciate. And mange, by observing the skin scrapings in 10% potassium hydroxide, you could able to differentiate between sheeppox and mange. Treatment and control. There is no effective treatment in majority of the viral infections, and it's only a symptomatic treatment. And antibiotic therapy to control the secondary bacterial complications, fluid therapy, and feeding light gruel. So all these three viral infections, they're causing a lot of damage to the oral mucosa. That's why feeding practices are very, very important. Giving light gruel to the animal so that the animal takes the feed easily, and it gives some energy to the animal for its survivability. Coming to the vaccination, there are clear-cut vaccinations for sheeppox and goatpox. There are clear-cut vaccines for us. For sheeppox, it may be from Romanian Fanner, or it may be from sheeppox virus Srinagar strain or Ranipet strain. Here the dose is more than 10 TCID50, and in case of goatpox, it is Uttarkashi strain, and the dose is 1 × 10⁻³ TCID50 vaccine dose. Generally, the age of vaccination from 3 months onwards, and you can start at 4 months. And advisable to vaccinate the animals during kidding season or before the onset of breeding season, so that the young lambs or kids will get cholesterol immunity. So these are the 3 important viral diseases that I would like to cover in this webinar. So one is blue tongue. So in case of blue tongue, the samples to be submitted to the laboratory is generally blood in heparin, and some of the postmortem lesions either from spleen or from the uterus or from the abnormal fetus. So all these things can be collected and submitted, but the primary agent for the diagnosis of the blue tongue or for the primary sample will be the blood in heparin and serum sample. Then coming to the foot rot. This is a bacterial infection which is caused by Diclobacter nodosus. Then this is a clinically well-defined contagious foot disease of sheep caused by the gram-negative anaerobic bacterium. Here, this is an obligate anaerobe. It will not survive in the oxygen environment. So this is an obligate anaerobe caused by Diclobacter nodosus. This is a gram-negative bacterium. And the Fimbria has for the classification of this bacteria into different serogroups, that is A to I and M. And the secondary invaders are very, very important for this foot rot, that is Fusobacterium necrophorum and the different Rima as well as the Trupperella species. These are all the things that are important for or act as secondary invaders for this disease. There are a number of virulent Diclobacter nodosus, especially highest in feet with interdigital dermatitis at very early stage than later stages. And sheep are the main host for this disease. Breeds are merinos and brown-headed meat sheep. Then not only sheep, cattle also get infected with foot rot by co-grazing with the infected sheep. The synergism between Fusobacterium necrophorum, Trupperella pyogenes, and Diclobacter nodosus. These three things are very, very important for the more occurrence or a higher prevalence of this particular disease. So the Fusobacterium necrophorum, it secretes leukotoxin, which facilitates the survivability of Trupperella pyogenes. So this Trupperella pyogenes is nothing but Archaeobacter pyogenes, and the previous name for this is Corynebacterium pyogenes. So, and this Trupperella pyogenes produce growth factors, which favors the multiplication of Fusobacterium necrophorum. Similarly, this Fusobacterium necrophorum causes tissue damage, which facilitates the action of Diclobacter nodosus, whereas Diclobacter nodosus produce growth factors for the multiplication of Fusobacterium necrophorum. So this Fusobacterium necrophorum is also an anaerobic organism. Diclobacter nodosus is also an obligate anaerobe, whereas Trupperella pyogenes is the one which takes up whatever the oxygen, little oxygen that is available at the portion of lesion. Then what are the determinants of the disease that favors the occurrence of the foot rot? Host poor claw hygiene is one of the major determinant that helps the occurrence of this disease. Coming to the agent, virulence of the agent, extracellular proteases. So this is the bacteria which releases proteases, and these proteases are basic proteases and acidic proteases. Among the acidic proteases, acidic protease 2 is the one which is responsible for virulent foot rot. So virulent foot rot associated with APR2 and the type 4 fimbria. These fimbria are helpful for the organism for its attachment to at the site of lesion. And environmental factors, moist environment, continuous rains, prolonged stay of the animals in the muddy areas, all these things favors the anaerobic environment of the foot, in turn leads to the multiplication of this organism, and infection with other microorganisms. All these things favor the occurrence of the foot rot. So Diclobacter nodosus, it can persist in the wet soils up to 24 days. And low tenacity is found in dry environments. Under ideal conditions, both pasture and stables, the organism may stay contaminated, or the environment gets contaminated under ideal conditions, that is warm and wet conditions. Iatrogenic transmission of Diclobacter nodosus is also observed because of trimming knives. And there is no long-term immunity in the sheep after disease. So if the sheep gets affected today, you cannot take it as a granted that this sheep is having lifelong immunity. There is no such guarantee for this infection. Clinical signs, incubation period is 2 to 3 weeks. Mild interdigital dermatitis, that is benign foot rot. Virulent foot rot. So in case of virulent foot rot, you can appreciate underrunning of the heel and separation of sole and abaxial wall, resulting in underrunning of the toe and complete separation of the hoof capsule. Animal shows very painful clinical signs. Sheep often stands on 3 legs and exhibit lameness and ambulation, lameness during walking on ambulation. Sometimes they eat while resting on their carpels, and distinctive strong foul odor is observed in case of foot rot. In rare cases, slow spontaneous healing may eventually occur. The hoofs may remain deformed or show localized anomalies such as cracks and discoloration of the horn, but these animals, they act or remain as carriers and pose a great risk to the flock. So in this article, the author has given beautiful pictures related to the foot rot. The first one is a healthy foot, healthy dry foot. Then from second and third picture, the appearance of clinical signs start. The first one, humid and inflamed interdigital space with some hair loss. Then extensive skin inflammation, damaged horn in the interdigital space. Later on, detachment of the axial horn, that means inner horn wall, underrunning of the horn towards the sole. Underrunning expands to the outer horn wall, that is abaxial wall, and the pododerma gets affected, and the removal of hoof capsule, complete separation, and extended pododerma damage is observed. So because of this, the animal gets lot of pain, and generally these two animals are suffering with a severe foot rot. In one animal is standing on its 3 legs by folding the affected limb, The other one is grazing by resting on their carpets, that is by resting on their carpet. So how to differentiate this swelling, whether it is a foot rot or not? Generally, in case of foot rot, it is the symmetrical swelling that is appeared at the down of this axial midline. So this is with foot rot, and this is with bone infection. So uniform swelling is observed in case of foot rot. Coming to the diagnosis, samples to be collected are the swabs from the interdigital space. So this swab from the interdigital space, you can transport to the laboratory by using some transport medium, but the primary isolation is very, very challenging in case of foot rot. This is because this organism is a obligate anaerobe. That means it is a strict anaerobe, cannot survive in the oxygen environment. So for that purpose, try to collect the swab and immediately place it on a hoof agar plate at the site of collection itself is recommended. Otherwise, transport these swabs to the laboratory immediately or as early as possible by using anaerobic jars. Then after pure culture, by using hoof agar plates, you can use Brucella agar with 5% sheep blood for the isolation, using heming and vitamin K for its propagation. These are the pictures that are showing primary isolation of a foot organism, that is Dicolobacter nodosus, on hoof agar plates. Another diagnostic protocol is by using PCR. Using PCR of 16S ribosomal RNA, FIMEA gene or INTA gene. Then coming to the treatment. In general, prompt treatment within 3 days of onset of lameness is highly effective, and different antibiotics can be used like oxytetracycline, fluorphenicol, amoxicillin, penicillin, streptomycin, lincomycin, pectinomycin, erythromycin, pilmicocin, and enterofloxacin. So here nowadays, because of the advent of One Health program, there is a little bit classification among the usage of antibiotics. So high priority, critically important antibiotics were listed by WHO. Here comes the list with macrolides and quinolines. In case of macrolides, erythromycin, gamithromycin, and pilmicocin, quinolines, enterofloxacin. They come under these high priority antibiotics. So whenever there's a need, veterinarians should use these antibiotics. That means that they have they ask to reduce the usage of these antibiotics as feed additives, etc. But if the case wants us, we can use these antibiotics. NSAIDs. So generally use of NSAIDs is underutilized in case of sheep, but the animal is feeling a lot of pain because of the damage to the hoof, etc. In majority of the diseases, NSAIDs usage is very, very important to reduce or to lessen the pain of the animal. Flunixin meglumine is the one which is helpful to reduce the pain at the dose rate of 1.1 milligrams per kg body weight. And the managemental practices. Foot trimming is very, very important. Next, foot bath. So here the level of this solution of foot bath, it should be at least 6 centimeters deep, and the animal should stay in that foot bath for at least 10 minutes. So after foot bathing, sheep must remain on a firm and clean floor until hooves get dried. And the most commonly used disinfectants for foot bath are zinc sulfate solution, formaldehyde, and copper sulfate solution. So this zinc sulfate solution, 15 to 18% zinc sulfate solution is required as a foot bath. And later on, keep the animal in a dry environment so that the foot get disinfected. The author Greber et al., he mentioned that he has successfully eliminated the virulent strain of Dicolobacter nodosus from 20 sheep flocks using 10% zinc sulfate disinfectant solution within 6 to 19 weeks of weekly foot bathing, without the use of antibiotics and with minimal culling of animals. That means he is giving the importance of foot bath in reducing the occurrence of foot rot. Alternative foot bath is 2 to 5% formaldehyde, but do not exceed 5% because above 5% it leads to the damage to the hoof cracks or hardening of the hoof takes place. And another thing is generally formaldehyde, it is not effective in organic compounds. So if the solution gets dirty with the organic compounds, the effectiveness of the formaldehyde gets reduced. And another solution one can use is 5% copper sulfate as foot bath. But the problem with the 5% copper sulfate, though it is very effective in the organic matter, but the problem with this is Copper toxicity. Do not pour this copper sulfate in water bodies because it immediately causes copper toxicity in the animals. Another thing, if the animals are not, if the animals hasn't taken water for a long duration of time, and if you subject these animals for food bathing with copper sulfate, they immediately take the copper sulfate because of taste also. It's a little bit salty in its taste. So the animal takes that water and ultimately leads to the another complication, that is copper toxicity. So among these three food bath disinfectants, zinc sulfate is the best one. Then vaccination. I think we are at for the development of vaccine for foot rot, monovalent or bivalent vaccines, to avoid immunological competition between the vaccines. Serial approach of vaccine is required. Bivalent and monovalent vaccines at 3 months interval was shown to be effective in the eradication of foot rot from the flocks. So this is about foot rot. And another important thing with the foot rot is, suppose if there is dampness in the environment or in the farm and severe rain, in that case, one can spray the magnesium sulfate in the damp environment or in the shed to reduce the water level in that particular area. So to reduce that water level, one can spray magnesium sulfate. It is one of the managemental practice that can be used to reduce dampness in the farm or dampness in the shed. Coming to the another important disease, that is enterotoxemia caused by Clostridium perfringens. All of you know well about this organism. This is also an anaerobic organism found in the lower digestive tract. There are 5 types, A, B, C, D, E, and type D is the one which is responsible for enterotoxemia, which is also known as overeating disease or pulpy kidney disease. And this is commonly observed in lambs less than 2 weeks of age. High carbohydrate diet is the one responsible for the occurrence of disease. And this organism, it is found in the lower digestive tract, and the environmental clues play an important role for the activation of virulence gene in this organism. So these environmental cues are nothing but overeating by the animals, reduced intestinal motility, increased carbohydrate content in the digestive tract. All these things favor the development or favor the expression of this virulence gene by the organism. In turn releases the epsilon toxin, and this toxin enters into the circulation, which in turn leads to the clinical signs. So in case of ET, in sheep, the incidence rate is about 1.5%, death rate is 2.4%, and case fatality rate is 30.8%. And here the occurrence of disease is associated with humid weather conditions with rain, and Clostridium perfringens carry the gene beta-2 toxin have been identified and suggesting a role for beta-2 toxin in caprine enterotoxemia and a common cause of death in growing kids. Clinical signs: animal abruptly go off feed, young ones abruptly go off feed, and signs of stomach pain. Animal cries, kicks its belly, repeatedly laying down and getting up and laying down, and lays from side to side, panting and crying out. These are the signs that you observe in the small lambs. Then they lose their ability to stand. They lay on their sides, extend their legs with their head and neck extended back on their withers. Sudden death, incoordination, circling, pushing head against fixed objects, and convulsions appear before death. All these things because of encephalomalacia caused by the epsilon toxin. So this is the first picture is showing the typical stand of the animals because of pain and all. And the intestine, if you go for the postmortem, intestine shows dark colored small intestine. This is because of the toxin. Coming to the diagnosis, samples to be collected or intestinal loop, isolation of the agent, demonstration of toxin by giving it to the 0.5 ml to mice, and PCR. Treatment. So probiotics helps to protect the animals from the disease. So probiotics gels are paste with good bacteria, oral electrolyte solutions, antibiotic therapy, fluoroquinolines. Here, in case of antibiotic therapy, one of the important point is fluoroquinolines are contraindicated in young lambs because this is the one which causes damage to the cartilage and it causes growth retardation. So try to avoid fluoroquinolines in young ones. The choice of antibiotics are either synthetic penicillins or cephalosporins. These are the best choice of antibiotics in case of this enterotoxemia. And oral administration of antacids, anti-bloating medication, pain reduction, intramuscular thiamine to prevent the encephalomalacia, supportive therapy such as intravenous or subcutaneous fluids and corticosteroids. These are the things that helps the organism to revive back from the infection. But prevention is better than cure. So for prevention, vaccination is one of the important practice. Toxan-Bactrin anaculture vaccine for Clostridium perfringens. So type D, antigen type B at the dose rate of 5 international units. Here, primary immunization should be done to the young ones at 3rd month, 6 months, and 12 months of age, and later on yearly vaccinations. If the disease is being observed consistently in the young lambs, then go for Eve immunization during the breeding season. Prior to the beginning of the breeding season, you give 1 injection, and later 4 to 6 weeks before lambing, another injection. And then yearly injections should be given as a vaccination to control this particular disease. And smart feeding strategies are very, very important to reduce the risk of enterotoxemia. Here, the risk diets are grains, silage and hay, lush pasture, milk or milk replacers, protein supplements, complete feeds such as pellets. These are all comes under risk diets for enterotoxemia. So when feeding the animals with these risk diets, divide the daily allotment of these feeds to each animal so that small feedings are feasible, so that the animals are not going to be overfed and there is no risk of enterotoxemia. So with the managemental practice, if you educate the farmer about the managemental practices, it is very easy to control this infection. There are vaccines for ET alone in combination with BQ or in combination with the PT, that is tetanus. There are vaccines for this Clostridial infection. Another important infection is anthrax caused by Bacillus anthracis. This is the distribution of this disease. Hyperendemic areas are red and endemic areas are pink. India is endemic to anthrax. Here, the source of infection is spores, infected soil, bone meal, protein concentrates, excreta, blood, water, and other materials acts as source of infection, and spread of infection from one area to another area, either by streams, insects, dogs, or carnivores. Fecal contamination, avian scavengers, all these things acts. All these are the methods for the spread of infection from one area to another area. Here, I would like to tell you the outbreak that we observed when we are studying post-graduation. That outbreak has happened in a village where the farmer did he deskinned the animal in a pool of at a pool of water in a grazing area, that is in an upland area. And that source is being used by other animals as a water source, then there is a rapid spread of anthrax. So unknowingly that the practice of the farmer led to the anthrax outbreak in that village. Then transmission of the disease, ingestion and inhalation, animals, ingestion, biting flies, all these things act as transmitting routes of transmission of the disease. And the determinants of the disease or the risk factors are host, species and breed, agent, virulence and survivability. Environmental factors like heavy rains after severe summer, dry summer after prolonged rain, incubator areas, anthrax years. So these incubator areas, generally if the soil is being contaminated with the anthrax spores, sometimes that soil and incubator areas for these spores. Not only that, because of the heavy rains after severe summer or dry summer after a prolonged rain, all these things leads to the availability of the spore in that particular area. Pathogenesis, any mode of entry, either it may be ingestion, inhalation, or by contact, etc. Any mode of entry, it reaches the regional lymph nodes and it traces the phagocytosis. From the lymph nodes, it enters into the blood. And later on, because of the toxins released by the organism, that is protective antigen, lethal factor, and edema factor, ultimately leads to the death because of acute renal failure, shock, and terminal anoxia. This is the sheep affected with anthrax can appreciate oozing of tarry-colored blood. Immediately, that one died because of the disease. Clinical signs in case of sheep, paracute and acute form. In paracute form, death is evident within 1 to 2 hours. Before death, if you closely observe the animal exhibits a severe fever, muscle tremors, dyspnea, terminal convulsions, collapse, and death. And in case of acute form, the course is about 1 to 3 days. Respirations are rapid and deep. heart rate is increased, diarrhea and dysentery. Milk production is decreased if that animal is in milking. Edema of throat and sternum is observed in some animals. Necropsy, you should not go for PM. There is no PM. There is no rigor mortis, no clotting of blood, Sahar's appearance, oozing of dark colored blood. If any postmortem has done unknowingly, it's splenomegaly and blackberry jam-like appearance of the spleen is observed. Diagnosis, the samples to be collected are generally for bacteriology from the unopened carcasses, blood and edema fluid. Opened carcasses, it is spleen and lymph nodes, and direct smears. Histology, spleen and lymph nodes. But here, the first and foremost rule is you should not conduct postmortem for the anthrax suspected case. First, confirm there is no organism in the direct smears, then go for other protocols. And then identification of the A by observing the clinical signs, then polychrome methylene blue staining of the smears, which is nothing but McFadden's reaction, where capsule appears pink and organism appears blue. Culture on nutrient agar and blood agar. The organism shows non-hemolytic Medusa head colonies, gamma phage, and if the sample is contaminated, you can use plaque medium. And the serological tests are Ascolis test, which is used for the identification of thermostable antigen, immunofluorescence for the capsule observation, ELISA for a protective antigen testing, and hypersensitivity test is also there for anthrax by using anthracene protein, and PCR detection for the PXO2 plasmid gene. Differential diagnosis. Here, it should be differentiated from lightning strike. Definitely the history or the environmental conditions itself will give some clue about the lightning strike. Paracute black leg, wherein which you can appreciate generally black leg is appeared in well-bred or well-fed animals, and one side of the limb gets affected. It shows gangrenous myositis, and if you touch the affected portion, it gives crepitation, malignant edema of the face, bacillary hemoglobinuria, and then hypomagnesemic tetany, paracute babesiosis, sudden death due to toxins and poisonous plants. All these things needs to be differentiated for the differential diagnosis of this particular disease. Then treatment. Penicillins are the choice at the dose rate of 20,000 international units per kg body weight, streptomycin 10 grams daily in 2 doses, oxytetracycline 5 milligrams per kg body weight. Control, no PM. If it is a suspected carcass, bury 2 meters deep with quicklime. Quarantine the farm, destruction of the cadavers, vaccination of the survivors, reduce human exposure, use long-acting penicillins. And disinfection of the farm by using 5% Lysol, 5 to 10% sodium hydroxide, 3% peracetic acid at the rate of 8 liters per meter square to kill the spores. Clothes, 10% formaldehyde, shoes, ethylene oxide, hair and wool by using gamma irradiation. Then immunization, widely we are using Steny strain vaccine for the control of this anthrax. And the dose of this vaccine is 10 to the power of 6 culturable spores. In case of cattle and horses, 1 to 5 into 10 to the power of 6 culturable spores in case of sheep and goat as well as in pigs. You can go for a ring vaccination. And the vaccinated animals are prohibited from slaughter for 45 days and milk should be discarded for 72 hours. So these are all about the 3 important bacterial diseases in sheep and goat. Coming to the another important disease, which is a multifactorial disease, that is mastitis. So nowadays, generally, we are not giving that much importance to the mastitis in small animals. But still, this mastitis is causing a lot of problem in the farming of this particular sector. So the mastitis observed nowadays, the incidence of mastitis, it ranges from 10 to 30% in the sheep flocks or as well as in the goat farming. That's why it is one of the important diseases that needs to be considered in the sheep and goat sector also. So mastitis in sheep, mainly because of it may be because of the multiple teat canals or because of the leaky teats, because of deficiency to phosphorus, which it leads to the environmental mastitis by the E. coli. And the species affected in both 30 to 40% get affected while giving birth. and 20% during the time of weaning, or 70% during the time of dry period. And in case of sheep, 30 to 40% during the time of giving birth, and 20 to 30% during the weaning or dry period. This is the percentage of getting affected with the mastitis in case of sheep and goat during two different periods, either during the time of giving birth or during the time of dry period. These are the different organisms that are responsible for the mastitis in sheep and goat. In case of sheep, the mastitis is mainly caused by Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus agalactiae, whereas in case of goats, mastitis is mainly caused by Mycoplasma agalactiae, Mycoplasma mycoides, and then comes to the Staphylococcus. In case of sheep, Mannheimia hemolytica also plays an important role for the occurrence of this particular disease, along with other organisms like E. coli, Clostridium perfringens, Pseudomonas, and Corynebacterium. And in case of goats, also there are several organisms that are responsible for this disease. And to reduce the incidence of mastitis, one body score or a body condition is high and tight udder is very, very important to reduce the occurrence of the mastitis. And it should be above the level of hog. So if the animal is having pendulous udder, it is more likely to develop mastitis because of damages by bruising or lacerations. And even the lambs or kids feel difficult to nurse or for nursing. So these are the different udder conformations. The first one is perfect, whereas the rest of the ones are showing possibility for the occurrence of mastitis. And abnormal teat canals or abnormal teats are the ones which are responsible for the occurrence of mastitis in sheep and goat. The clinical observations: the udder may be abnormal, swollen, hot, red, painful. Milk may contain blood tinged or yellow. Texture may be thick, lumps or very watery, maybe foul odor. Lambs, kids refuse to nurse. Animal may be visibly ill with fever or depressed and off feed. So mild clinical mastitis, severe clinical mastitis, and chronic mastitis are observed in these animals. So mild clinical mastitis, abnormality of milk such as flakes, clots, and watery discharge, and udder may be swollen, hot, or sensitive. Severe, hot, hard, sensitive udder, painful, fever, rapid pulse, depression, weakness, loss of appetite. Chronic, prolonged subclinical form turns to show signs like lumps in the udder from the walling of bacterial and forming a connective tissue. So these are the two animals that are showing signs of mastitis. And this is the mastitis milk showing different signs. And blueback condition is also observed because of gangrenous mastitis. So severe mastitis results into gangrene. Udder appears dark red and hard and then turns to blue. Affected gland will not be functional and requires a surgical removal of the affected portion. And the subclinical mastitis, it is most common in small ruminants. Reduced milk production, increased bacterial and somatic cell counts. Generally, we are not taking these somatic cell counts, but if anyone is interested to observe the somatic cell counts, the normal somatic cell count range is up to 5 to 10 lakhs. Generally, if it is less than 5 lakhs, the milk is normal. If it is more than 10 lakhs, the milk is showing subclinical mastitis. Udder generally appears normal, may start as clinical and progress to chronic and subclinical. Treatment: antibiotic therapy. Amoxicillin clavulanic acid is the one which is showing good results. Along with that, cephalosporins. So generally, in order to go for antibiotic treatment in these animals, try to use lower generation antibiotics. Don't go for higher generation. Then mastitis prevention at the time of weaning. Cut out all the grains 3 to 5 days prior to weaning and switch to a lower quality forage to decrease the amount of milk being produced. And reduce all feeding 12 to 24 hours prior to weaning. So if you reduce the feeding of the animal prior to the weaning, so that there is reduced milk production in the gland, in turn reduces the occurrence of mastitis in these animals. So finally, the important points to remember: in growing animals, fluoroquinolines are contraindicated, that is ceprofloxacin or moxifloxacin, etc. And the alternatives are synthetic penicillins and cephalosporins. For Clostridial infections, penicillins are more useful. Soft tissue damage by different diseases like blue tongue, PPR, foot and mouth disease, sheeppox, and ORF use penicillins and cephalosporins, which work better. For foot rot, oxytetracycline is useful along with foot bath. And one can spray magnesium sulfate to reduce the dampness of shed or ground. And in case of mastitis, intramammary infusions with the penicillins or ceftarazone, along with the systemic administration based on ABSP result. And in case of summer mastitis, macrolide antibiotics are helpful along with the systemic administration of antibiotics based on the antibiotic sensitivity test results. And in case of ARF, application of acriflavin. In case of pneumonia, amoxicillin, clavulanic acid, and ceftiofur is helpful. When it comes to the known cases of mycoplasma, tylosin is indicated along with NSAIDs, that is flunixin, meglumine. And for listeriosis, gentamicin and ceftoxim sodium is promising. And treatment of abortions caused by Campylobacter and Brucella, advised to use gentamicin and oxytetracycline. Abortions and other manifestations of infectious keratoconjunctivitis caused by different species of bacteria like Moraxella, Mycoplasma, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus should be treated systemically and locally. Chlamydial infection, that is enzootic abortions in Eve, oxytetracycline is showing promising results. These are the doses of some of the antibiotics. Moxifloxacin 5 milligrams per kg body weight. The half-life of moxifloxacin is high. That's why even you can reduce the dose. Then enrofloxacin 2.5 milligrams per kg body weight, ciprofloxacin 5 mg per kg, ofloxacin 3 milligrams per kg, ceftoxim sodium 10 to 20 milligrams per kg, ceftiofur 1.1 to 2.2 milligrams per kg body weight, amoxicillin clavulanic acid 10 to 20 mg per kg body weight, oxytetracycline 5 to 10 mg per kg body weight, tylosin tartrate 12 milligrams per kg, gentamicin 6 to 12, sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim 50 milligrams per kg body weight. And what are the points to be remembered during the control programs? Reduce the infection pressure, eliminate or minimize the risk factors that can be influenced. So by observing the farm itself, you can assume these might be the risk factors. So eliminate or minimize those risk factors, increase the non-specific immunity in the animal, that means feeding properly and giving colostrum to the lambs and kids, and increase specific immunity by means of vaccination. So those 4 points can be attained by following these methods, that is ensure adequate cholesterol immunity, identify and isolate the affected animals, prevent the introduction of infected animals, determine the source of infection, if possible, remove that source, clean and disinfect the animal houses and grounds regularly, avoid stress in the animal, and regular vaccination. So this is the vaccination chart. Probably all of you know pretty well about the different vaccination protocols for this sheep and goat sector, and it should be referred with the local authorities. Anthrax, hemorrhagic septicemia, enterotoxemia, blackwater, PPR, foot and mouth disease, sheeppox, goatpox, and CCPP. This is the picture that I have taken from Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying in their advisory for sheep and goat disease. This was developed by Central Sheep and Wool Research Institute, Avikanagar. This is a chart that is giving in different managemental practices. That means vaccination, deworming, etc. Hope this is useful to you. So at the end, my sincere acknowledgement to all the persons. Actually, it is not possible for a single person to physically identify a vast number of infectious diseases in the sheep and goat. So I feel it is my bounded duty to acknowledge all the others who have provided a lot of information and photographs of different diseases in different open access journals, and also web platform for providing a lot of useful information. So finally, I would like to say, and I would like to appreciate the efforts of veterinarians in this COVID situation. They are doing well for the welfare of animals. Amid COVID situation, all the veterinarians are doing very well, and they are performing a lot for the welfare of animals. So with this, I'm ending my webinar. I hope it is useful for you. Though I'm having a little experience with this, but I tried my level best to give two points that are related to the field that helps you in the diagnosis or that helps you to identify the diseases. So thank you for your patience and inviting your questions.